Hi everyone, welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin. We love reading your listener comments, and we feature them in every episode. Today we have a comment from Potens on X, writing in response to our recent episode with Hasu and Vasily about Lido's launch of dual governance. Potens wrote, "Dual governance is fascinating, balancing token holder interests with protocol needs. Curious to know if this model becomes the new standard for sustainable DeFi governance. To have your comment featured, write a review of the podcast overall or leave a comment on our video on YouTube, Farcaster, or X. This is the July 4th, 2025 episode of Unchained. Ledn is a leading platform for Bitcoin-backed loans, offering a secure and transparent way to unlock liquidity without selling your Bitcoin. Issuing loans since 2018 and earning over 1,000 Trustpilot reviews. Learn more at ledn.io. Imagine an AI that speaks crypto and does the work of a team of analysts. Introducing Focal by Falcon X, bringing clarity to a world of noise. Visit askfocal.com. Today's topic is the $59 million Polymarket dispute over whether Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky wore a suit by the end of June. Here to discuss is Calvin Hamilton, a bettor on the yes side. Welcome, Calvin.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for having me.
This Polymarket bet on whether Zelensky wore a suit before July is now the top market on the site. It's beating out even the one about the F1 Drivers' Championship. And it looks like a foregone conclusion when you look at that market with only a 2% chance of it being resolved as yes. But there's been a lot of controversy around it. Can you explain what's happened?
I will do my best. There is a lot of nuance here, but the shortest way, in the most clear way that I can put it, is that Polymarket created what is otherwise a fairly silly market on whether or not Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky will wear a suit before various time periods. This market actually existed last month as well. So there was a market for this exact same thing, but it was before June instead of before July. And now this month it was for before July. Last month, when this market happened, there was a little bit of controversy at the end of the month because Vladimir Zelensky was in Germany, where he wore an outfit that fit the dictionary definition of a suit. And given that the Polymarket rules simply dictate that if he is, videotaped or photographed wearing a suit as reported by, credible media, that is when the market should resolve to yes. The market actually resolved to no last month. And the reason for this, as I understand it, is that the quote unquote spirit of the market is that he should be wearing a traditional Western suit, meaning exactly what you would expect a president to wear otherwise. And this is obviously highly contentious because the rules do not state that.
In the May market,
as well as in this market, and I say the May market, so the before June market, which is I think like late April through May, and so the rules haven't changed. Now, last month in June, President Zelensky went to a NATO summit in The Hague in the Netherlands, and he was photographed wearing something that looks eerily like a black suit, and it was reported to be a black suit by numerous global news outlets, ranging from the BBC to the New York Post to, Derek Guy made a tweet about this suit, but it was relating to the May market. There it is. And they all said President Zelensky spotted wearing a suit. And so given that Polymarket's criteria for resolving this market to yes says that if there is consensus from credible reporting that he's wearing a suit, that this will resolve to yes, you would imagine that this fits that criteria, that this meets those standards because there's overwhelming evidence and overwhelming consensus from credible reporting. However, it does seem like the market's going to resolve to no because the UMA voters and a lot of the Polymarket bettors say that this outfit resembles the outfit and looks very similar to the outfit that he wore last month, which also resolved to no.
Okay. And can you share that link, the May one?
The May one? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one other thing to mention here is the, and you can just share it maybe in the chat here or in the Twitter DMs that we had. But basically, the June market had a different way of defining how this would be resolved. And it was based on this consensus of credible reporting. And so, okay.
Well, so I'll actually clarify that the June and May markets have the exact same criteria according to
Oh, they
Polymarket.
do.
They do, which is what makes this even more contentious, is that from the June market, at no point in time did Polymarket bother issuing additional clarification as to what a suit should be defined as, or what consensus of credible reporting is considered to be. So this month, or when I say this month, I'm referring to what happened in June for the July market. The biggest point of debate is there's tons of credible news outlets that have reported Zelensky wearing a suit. And so does that not meet the requirement for consensus of credible reporting? I would argue that it does, even if you look at the outfit and you don't say that it's a traditional suit.
Right. So here's a few different examples of that. One of them is this Polymarket tweet, actually, which calls what he was wearing a suit, which is interesting. Here's the New York Post showing that it is that they think it's a suit. Zelensky ditches T-shirt for a suit for sit-down meeting with President Trump. There's a bunch of these. There's the BBC, the Huffington Post, menswear guy on X, Derek Guy, who at least on X seems to be the authority in all things fashion. He also said that it was a suit. And you had created a document that was circulating that captured a bunch of different instances of media outlets calling it a suit. There were 51 that I saw that you captured. A lot of them, well, I should say, so most of them just directly called it a suit. Some, right in the headline, that was what the story was about. Others in the copy of the article. Others did use some qualified phrasing, like the New York Times said he wore a black suit jacket. So I do see, or everybody can all see just by looking at it that, like, if you were to just imagine a suit in your head, maybe it wouldn't look exactly like that. But, it basically fits the basic definition. Like, looking at it, I had the feeling he knew he had made this promise to not wear a suit, but then he found himself in situations where he needed to wear a suit. And so he kind of tried to like split the baby a little bit. However, the most important or most interesting, I should say, of these different instances of people, kind of debating whether or not this is a suit is actually Zelensky himself. In an interview, he describes what he was wearing as a suit.
Something like that. And indeed, there were things that don't bring us closer to ending the war. There were some the media people standing around us were talking about some small things, like my suit.
So, as we can all see there, he himself describes it as a suit. Why is it that you think that we have this case where it looks like Polymarket, despite the notion that this consensus of credible reporting requirement has been met, why does it look like it's going to resolve to no?
So this is where things are a little strange and a little complicated. The best answer that I can give is that because last month was also contentious, where when in Germany, Zelensky wore a similar outfit that ultimately resolved to no. But mind you, last month, there wasn't much media covering that outfit. There were a couple of articles. Everybody keeps telling me that, we also had consensus of media. But by all accounts, when I've looked into it, it looks like there's a maximum of 5 articles that existed on Zelensky wearing a suit in the month of May for the before June market. So do you really call that consensus of credible reporting? I don't know. I think it's a bit more of a stretch when you only have 5 sources that you can state or quote. But the market ultimately resolved to no. And then this month, when he wore a similar outfit, right? It's not the same. People keep saying that it's the same outfit as before. It's not. If you look at the little lapels of the jacket, it's quite clearly a different jacket that he's wearing. But because it is undoubtedly similar, I'm not going to, be an idiot and say that it is, not a gray area. He's clearly walking a fine line here. And I personally think it's a little bit of a stretch to call it a suit, but at the same time, it does fit the dictionary definition of a suit, and credible reporting has said as much, that it is a suit. So the problem that we're facing is that the precedent for a very similar outfit is that this is in fact not a suit, and thus the market should resolve to no. And if the market were to resolve to yes, it would effectively be kind of a middle finger to everybody who voted yes on last month's market, right? It's saying, hey, this is a very similar outfit. And even though some people called it a suit last month, we ultimately resolved to no. So if they were to resolve to yes this time around, it would just be a massive contradiction. And it would upset a lot of Polymarket's bettors and customers that voted on yes last month. So a lot of people who voted yes on last month's market have actually been very vocal about the fact that they are voting no on this month's market, even though there's significant evidence that should go to show that it should resolve to yes. But ultimately, there's this precedent, which I think is more or less irrelevant because, again, at the end of the day, the Polymarket criteria is very clear. This should boil down to consensus of credible reporting, which was more or less non-existent in the previous month. In this month, it is, it's overwhelming. And so that's kind of the tricky part here, is that people think that UMA and Polymarket need to be consistent, even if being consistent requires that they ignore or neglect the evidence that's in front of them.
Markets are ripping, but not every pump is created equal. You need to make sense of the action and what's coming next. But where do you start? Meet Focal by Falcon X, your AI-powered crypto analyst. It's like having a legion of experts at your fingertips, ready to break down market-making events, chart protocol TVL, and track ETF flows. Get clarity in a world of noise with Focal. Learn more at askfocal.com. Wish you could access cash without selling your Bitcoin? Ledn makes that possible. The global leader in Bitcoin-backed lending, Ledn has issued over $9 billion in loans since 2018 and never lost a single Satoshi of client assets. Why is a Ledn loan different? With custodied loans, collateral is not lent out to generate interest. No credit checks, funds in less than 12 hours, no monthly payments. Repay whenever you want, with 0 penalties. And proof of reserves reports, verified by a top accounting firm, are published every 6 months. Ledn gives Bitcoin holders a secure, transparent way to unlock liquidity without selling. Learn more at ledn.io. That's LEDN.io. Have you watched the Lido show yet with Hasu and Vasily? Here's what Yanusa said about it on X. Criminal, this kind of deep dive is not being more appreciated. Keep cooking, Laura. To hear a comment featured on the show, please write a review or leave a comment on an episode on YouTube, Podcaster, or X. And so there's another factor here, which is that UMA has an integration with Polymarket, and that it comes into play in cases like this where there's contention over how the vote should be resolved. So explain how that works.
Absolutely. So for those of you listening or watching that aren't familiar, Polymarket as a company really just operates the platform in which you are able to cast your vote on what you think the outcome of different markets should be. But they're not the ones that ultimately decide how the vote or how that market is paid out. Instead, Polymarket outsources that responsibility to a protocol called UMA. And UMA is a cryptocurrency that you can buy. You can buy UMA tokens, and then you can stake them via the UMA platform. And you can use your staked UMA tokens to vote on the outcomes of these different markets. The goal behind the UMA protocol, as I understand it, is that they're trying to decentralize this process, this voting process, to make it so that you kind of have a decentralized democracy that's voting on the outcomes of these various markets. And when you are a voter that votes on the correct outcome for a market, and correct in this context means that you voted with the majority, you get paid out a reward in UMA tokens. On the flip side, if you vote for the wrong side with your staked UMA tokens, you risk being you risk being penalized essentially for your vote because you cast the wrong vote. So it's a little interesting how they've chosen to done this. They've gotten a lot of criticism because people have, I think, rightfully made this point that, hey, if you're a whale, meaning that you have hundreds of thousands or millions of UMA tokens, you can go ahead and you can vote on a specific outcome and you can skew the odds pretty significantly, right? If I have 10 million UMA token and I vote for a no outcome, the likelihood that somebody with 100,000 UMA token is going to want to vote against me is very, very slim. Because ultimately what that means is that they risk getting penalized for their vote because my tokens, given that I have 100 times as many as they do, are more than likely going to, end up how would I say this? The scale is tilted so significantly in my favor, given that I have so many more tokens than they do, that they might as well just vote with me no matter what. So that's kind of one of the biggest criticisms that UMA has received as part of this, that there are quote unquote bad actors on the platform that are trying to manipulate markets. Truth be told, I don't really think that that's a massive concern. At the end of the day, UMA's holders, especially the whales, want the protocol to work properly. They want the right outcomes for the markets because that's how the token's going to go up in value. If markets are constantly being manipulated by whales, tokens are going to go down in value, which means that whales are quite literally devaluing the thing that they're holding, their own assets, which just wouldn't make sense. So I don't think UMA is really responsible for what's happening here. I think that it's on Polymarket to create clear rules and issue clarifications early on what's happening in the market to ensure that there's no ambiguity on the back end. Because what's happened in this market is that we had no clear definition as to what a suit is. We had no clear definition as to what constitutes consensus of credible reporting. When there started to be some ambiguity around these things, when Zelensky was spotted in The Hague wearing something that resembled a suit, rather than issuing a public statement saying, hey, we believe that a suit is a traditional Western suit or something of the sort. Instead, Polymarket has an account called Polymarket Intel that tweets out saying President Zelensky in a suit last night. I interesting tweet that shows a comparison that when Polymarket Intel made that tweet, the volume on the President Zelensky suit, Polymarket, went through the roof. People started betting on this market in extreme volumes compared to before, because you would assume that if Polymarket's account is saying, hey, we saw President Zelensky in a suit last night, that that's absolute confirmation. That's how I got involved in this market. I have no interest on betting whether a Ukrainian man wore a suit a week ago. It's just not that interesting. But the only reason why I did it is that I thought that, okay, I found a unique opportunity where the odds are clearly being skewed. Meanwhile, Polymarket themselves has confirmed that, hey, this is what I think it is. So that's why I bet on yes. I thought this was absolute confirmation. There's no way that you can, lose on this. Only to find out that Polymarket has since backtracked. They've issued a statement that there is no consensus for credible reporting, and they've actually changed the bio of the Polymarket Intel account to now say community-run account, kind of distancing themselves from the tweet that went out. But if you look at the data, the volume on this market picked up significantly after that tweet from the Polymarket Intel account, and I think that in many ways they were kind of just like bringing in naive bettors who didn't know any better. And now those same people are being taken advantage of.
So one thing, though, is I did want to ask about, this issue around the UMA incentive, because there are people who are making comments that are quite explicit about how
I'm seeing them.
Yeah, if they were it just in a universe void of all this history that we've discussed, if they were to just bet on this one particular thing with, knowing what he wore that day in The Hague, they themselves would vote yes, that he wore a suit, but they know that it's just not only a waste of money, but then they might lose their UMA tokens. So I feel like there is also something about the way that this has been set up that creates incentives away from the truth, which is obviously not, I'm sure, the goal of Polymarket. So, I don't know. Have you thought about, like, what do you think would be a better way to resolve this type of dispute?
Oh, God. Okay, so my honest thoughts are that it is in the long-term best interest of UMA to vote either yes or unknown. If they vote yes, obviously that sides with the yes side of Polymarket. If they vote unknown, my understanding is that it goes to 50-50 odds, and that's how it's paid out. I don't think it's necessarily in the best interest to vote no, even though I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. And the reason why I think it is not in the best interest to vote no is because the market rules are very clear. They're, you can read them 100 times over, and they do not specify what constitutes a suit. They do not specify, what is consensus of credible reporting. So I do think that UMA is ultimately likely going to make the wrong decision here, unfortunately, that the voters are probably going to use precedent from last month to dictate the outcome of this market. I think that's wrong. I think that, if they really want to be a platform for truth, as both Polymarket and UMA claim to be, that you should ultimately side with what you think the truth is based off of the evidence that's before you. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but at the end of the day, it's up to everybody's own discretion.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, the distinction that you're making is, in May, there was no consensus of credible reporting. There were a few outlets, but now we have like more than 50. So is that...
Some people would argue that there was consensus of credible reporting. I've heard that there's a New York Times article that, claimed that Zelensky was wearing a suit. I didn't see that. I know that there was the Derek
In
Guy
May,
tweet.
you mean?
Yes, in May.
Oh, okay.
I know that there was a tweet from Derek Guy that says, yes, this is technically a suit. But the fact of the matter is, you had I think it was 5 outlets total that had reported on this. This month we have over 50. There's a significant difference there just in terms of the volume of reporting. So, I understand why last month's could have gone to no. I think it's still contentious. I think it probably should have gone to P3 or unknown. Unfortunately, Hart Lambert, who's the CEO of UMA, kind of issued a statement saying that, hey, there's no precedent to vote P3 or unknown, and thus we shouldn't do it. I think that was wrong. I don't think it's the CEO's position to come in and kind of influence how people vote, because ultimately that's a really bad take. By saying, hey, you shouldn't vote this way because there's no precedent for it, means that you will never vote this way because there's never going to be precedent for it. It's a silly, idea.
Right.
I spoke with Hart about that. He said that in hindsight, that's a good point, and that, maybe P3 is an interesting outcome for future markets. But this market in particular, I think it's more than likely that it resolves to no. I don't necessarily think that's the right outcome. I think that it kind of hurts the Polymarket brand and UMA's brand, because, again, I think that this is the evidence is overwhelmingly clear as to what the outcome is. But at the end of the day, it's just, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I think there's about 8 hours before it finally resolves. So what do you think is going to happen? So you just said what you think is going to happen, but what could happen that might result in a different resolution?
Truth be told, I think it's just highly unlikely. I think we're in a position where the only party that could really do anything to resolve this differently would be if Polymarket were to come forward and issue additional clarification saying that consensus has been met, or to clarify what they think the definition of a suit is, or what have you. I think Polymarket's made it very clear by their inaction that they're probably not going to do that. I personally have reached out to Shane Copland multiple times, who, I have Shane's cell phone number, right? I've met Shane. We've had dinner together. Shane's not a buddy of mine. We're not best friends. It's nothing like that, but we know each other because we have some mutual friends. And Shane ignored every single one of my texts. I sent him DMs. I reached out to some people on his team. Those were all ignored as well. When people made feedback posts in the Polymarket feedback section on the website, those were all rejected without any response. I personally made a feedback post that I thought was very respectful, essentially saying, hey, I think it would be a good idea for Polymarket to create some sort of markets integrity team that, can verify markets, look at data, issue early clarification statements. Because what Polymarket did in issuing a clarification statement on July 1st, in my opinion, is outrageous. That should have been done on June 26th, when all the media was coming out, to clarify it sooner rather than later. So I think that the ball's in their court to do that. Will they do it? No. I think this is ultimately going to try to get swept under the rug. Same reason why they went ahead and they just changed the bio of the Polymarket Intel account without actually making any sort of public statement saying, hey, we fucked up, we're wrong, we shouldn't have done this. But that is what it is. I think that this hurts their brand more than anything else. And the only thing that's going to influence the outcome of this market is if they come forward and they say something. But I don't think that it's going to happen. I think this market ultimately resolves to no. Thus, that being said, if anybody's watching this, I would not bet on this market. And I just want to make that abundantly clear. I would love to see this go to yes or to go to unknown, but I just don't think that's going to happen. And I don't want to see people lose money.
Actually, that is something interesting because now so much more money has poured in with the controversy. So why is that when it just looks like is it why is so much more money been pouring in recently?
Because it's so contentious and you have a lot of people. And when I say people, I'm really talking about kind of naive bettors that are coming in with $10, $100, maybe $1,000. And they think that this is going to be a really easy way to make 1,000x on their investment, if you want to
by betting yes.
Yeah, because I think that again, I firmly believe that the evidence is clear.
I don't understand then why are the odds at 2% of yes? If so many more people are voting yes, then why are the odds so low?
Because if you look at the amount of capital that is going into the market, the vast majority of that capital is going onto the no side. There are quite literally multiple people on Polymarket right now that have active positions betting no of over $1 million US. You don't have a single person betting yes with that same bet size.
Oh, okay. So all the people that are jumping in now, they're mostly betting no? Because it's just been going up and up and up ever since the controversy started. But they're all betting no?
Most of them, yeah. If we're just talking about volume of dollars, for sure.
Oh, okay. Okay. But do you think it's number of people is the opposite or hard to say?
Yeah, I don't know. My gut tells me that if we're focusing on number of people, that favors the yes side. But it seems to me that, and I only say this, and just to be very clear about why I'm getting this data, part of it's just gut reaction. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? And then the other part of me is looking at the polls that have taken place publicly. There have been multiple polls. One was on UMA's Twitter or X account. So if you go to UMA, they posted a poll. Is this a suit? Everybody voted yes. Not everybody, but it was 85% of people or something crazy. There have also been multiple polls in Discord. Same thing. Everybody says yes. So it seems to me that if we're just talking about net number of people, that it's in favor of yes. But if we're talking about actual capital entering the market, it's in favor of no.
All right. Okay. Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. Quite the contentious debate. I guess we'll see how it resolves.
I'm being called a liar 100 times in these comments.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to see what happens. I mean, we had our own internal debate here about whether or not it was a suit as well. I defer to menswear guy. That's my opinion, but
I think
thank you.
Well, I was just gonna as one last comment here, ultimately this is such a silly market, right? I'm not gonna act here or sit here and act like this is a crazy serious discussion, right? Is it a suit? Is it not? If you just look at the definition of a suit, it is. I think that Polymarket should have just clarified, hey, we're looking for a traditional Western suit. And so a lot of people that are saying, no, it's not a suit, you're not looking at the definition of a suit. You're thinking about what do you normally think of as a suit? And as do I. For the record, when I look at this outfit, I don't necessarily think oh yeah, that's what I think of when I think of a suit. It's just that it happens to fit the definition. And given that Polymarket didn't specify what it should look like, that's why I ultimately sided on yes, because also the media has been reporting on it as such. So that's kind of it. It's a really silly situation.
Yeah, I think the reason it's important is because it says something about the integrity of Polymarket, which is the leader in this particular space. So it's kind of how they handle this type of dispute is actually really important for future precedent.
Yeah. I completely agree. I wish that they had issued some kind of clarification statement much earlier. And then when they finally did, unfortunately, it was not what I think they should have done.
All right. Well, thank you so much for explaining this all on Unchained.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.